So Pablo says, "Have you seen my new time machine?" And Bob says, "Don't be silly. Time travel is impossible." Now Pablo says, "Wrong. You and I are traveling forward in time right now." And Bob says, "Very funny. What I mean is I cannot travel backwards in time. Time is not like a river in which I can jump out, walk up the riverbank, and jump back in at an earlier time, say 65 million years ago. So think about it like this. If I could travel back 65 million years before I was born, then I would be both born and not born. But being both born and not born is a contradiction, so I can't go back. Saying you have a time machine that can go back in time is like saying you have rounded the square. It just doesn't make sense. Your time machine is a logical impossibility. Pablo says, "You and your logic." Well, just look at this time machine and rethink your silly logic. First of all, that's not a time machine. It's a close-up of a candy cane. Now, Pablo says, "You argue that time travel to the past involves the contradiction of being born and not born, but I think you have committed the equivocation fallacy. If I traveled back in time, I would not be both born and not born, but would instead be born in personal time, but not in external time." This is the vocabulary of philosopher David Lewis. So my travel to 65 million years ago takes 1 minute in personal time, my wristwatch, but 65 million years in external time. This dissolves the contradiction since there are two different meanings of born, the equivocation fallacy. Now Bob says, "Well, I think there's something fishy going on with Lewis's two times. Remember, though, we are discussing a certain kind of time travel where we jump back 65 million years ago. Einstein has shown that time can slow down as you go fast relative to others, but can you jump back in time 65 million years ago? That's the more interesting question. Not just a slowing down, a jump back." As we shall see, the answer is no. First of all, that's not a time machine, it's a dinosaur egg. Anyway, another reason backward time travel is impossible is causal loops in which things come from nowhere. So let's say you're having trouble writing your great novel, so you travel 3 years into the future, buy the novel at the store, bring it back in time, and plagiarize yourself. So here's a central point. You can plagiarize the book now only because you got it from the future, but you can get it from the future only because you plagiarize it now. And that doesn't make sense, because each of the two events cause each other, but there's no cause of the pair of events together. And that's nonsensical. Now, Pablo says, "I understand your argument, my dear Bob, but there is nothing illogical about a causal loop. It's just weird. Logic doesn't demand that events have causes, and there's no contradiction in imagining uncaused events. There's a difference between facts and logic, Bob, and there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your logic." So how should Bob reply to this? Okay, Pablo, causal loops may just be weird, not illogical, but I would be careful about dismissing logic only when it doesn't agree with your conclusions. Also, reality is mysterious and magical, but backwards time travel is not just mysterious, magical, or illogical. It's incoherent. In addition to causal loops, I can show you the incoherence with paradoxes like the grandfather paradox. So here's one version. Imagine you go back and kill your parents prior to your own birth, so you won't be born. The point is that if you are born and use a time machine to go back and kill your parents, then you won't be born. But if you won't be born, then you won't be able to go back and kill your parents, in which case you will be born. So the idea of traveling into the past and changing the past just doesn't make sense. It doesn't just lead to a contradiction, it's incoherent. Now Pablo says, "Well, my first answer is there may be parallel universes. The idea is I killed my parents, and so I was not born in this universe, but I am born in other universes." First of all, this is not evidence for backward time travel. It's just a photo of an H.G. Wells time machine that slows down the processes of the body and travels only into the future. Our question is, can we jump back 65 million years ago? Now, you said parallel universes may solve the paradoxes like the grandfather paradox, since you would be born in one universe but not another if you traveled back and killed your parents or grandparents. Now, I find this so frustrating. People always bring up the unproven idea of multiple universes when they can't explain something. And allowing multiple universes is like allowing a contradiction in logic, because everything then becomes possible. But the simpler problem with your parallel universe response is that you wouldn't be born in this universe if you killed your parents, which is what matters. It's not much consolation to know you created another universe in which you were born. We want to avoid the incoherence that arises when you travel back in the past in this universe. The possibility of multiverses solves nothing and seems to lead to scatterbrain ad hoc thinking. Okay, so far we have explored the causal loops and paradoxes that seem to make backward time travel impossible, and the responses involving multiple universes and the two senses of time, well, they have problems. But Pablo now turns to modern science and points out that while slowing down personal time is not the same as backward time travel, Einstein has showed that space and time is like a fabric and that it may be curved. Theoretically, some scientists believe backward time travel may be possible because traveling the curve of space and time is like traveling the curve of Earth to return where you once began. Bob says most scientists are skeptical of backward time travel, and some don't even accept those mathematical equations. But Pablo is correct that some do, so we cannot dismiss backward time travel so easily. As for the paradoxes, Pablo says there are all kinds of speculative ideas on how to solve them. Perhaps you can go back but only observe and not change the past. Now, Bob interrupts and says they're making many questionable assumptions about the nature of time and consciousness, and also engage in ad hoc reasoning. And Pablo has had enough, so he teleports Bob into his time machine and tells